for you. Smile with the rising sun. Really the bird by my doorstep, singing sweet songs of melodies pure and true.
This is
My
message to you. Good afternoon. It's Roger here in Hallandsåsen in the south of Sweden on a chilly and fairly windy, cold Swedish spring day. Yesterday the Bank of England announced a 0.25 percentage point hike in its base rate, and the Federal Reserve in the United States did the same thing the day before, and I think last week the European Central Bank, the ECB, went for a 0.5% hike. Now I've done a blog this morning about the UK hike and how it's likely to affect the residential market in the United Kingdom, particularly in England and Wales. I focus on England and Wales, and that introduction there had a kind of an animation of some of the graphics from the UK residential market survey of the RICS. So if I just do this here, and we'll come to that one later, and that one. Here we have February 2023 UK Residential Market Survey, February 2023 of the RICS, okay? And this page here, which is explained in terms of the questions that are asked here. So question 8, how do you expect sales to change over the next 3 months? Question 9, how do you expect sales to change over the next 12 months? And then question 10, total sales over the last 3 months post-contract exchange level. Okay, so those 3 questions there are what feed into this graph here: national newly agreed sales, regionally agreed sales past month, and then there are price expectations. So just another point here, this is based on 406 surveying branches with 278 individual responses regarding those 408 branches, which are over the analysed areas, which are these England and Wales, and they're broken down into London, South East, East Anglia, Wales, South West, North West, Yorkshire and Humberside, that is, West Midlands, East Midlands, and Scotland and Northern Ireland over here. Now in February, everybody expected everything to be headed south. You can see everything points down, with the blue dot in 3 months, in most cases more pessimistic than the current month, and that's also true here. So that's in February, and what I did, I animated that because if I just put that over here, I downloaded each of those reports from January, that's January 2023. Right, so January 2022. So in January 2022, you can see that there was there's an uptick here at the beginning of 2022. So traditionally over the Christmas period, so December, things drop off a bit, and but over the next 3 months, people will be expecting things to pick up, all other things remaining equal, in a, you know, if everybody's feeling reasonably happy. Now, at the beginning of 2022, you can see here in most regions people were expecting the overall market to increase in terms of price rises, and you can see what those are there. Now, if we just come back to February again, I'll just bring February back on. You can see, if we just put them side by side here, so you've got January 2022 here, and then you've got February 2023 here, and you can see that the agreed sales in the past month, 40% of people are expecting those to be less, or reporting less activity than previously, as opposed to about 10% here. It is substantial. And then agreed sales in the past month, so this is February, this is January, you can see that the 3-month average is way down, and the only region which is even Stevens is in the north. But as we go through the year, so that's January there, January 2022, February 2022, you can see that in the February, the south, things are picking up speed here. Confidence is still fairly high. March 2022, just compare those two. And it's kind of bifurcated between the North, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that's March, April 2022. You know, there's nothing really to write home about at that stage with those things there. May 2022, come May, again, nothing to write home about. April, May, June and July, they don't publish these figures. There's September, August here actually. Yeah, so June, July they take a break, and then in August, you can see we come back in August. I'm just going to put September over here for now. Come back in August, and this is quite unusual. You can see, let's look at these. Between May and August, sorry. Alright, so here's August. Regionally agreed sales are below trend and falling in August already. So this is before the Kamikaze budget, and so this is rate hikes already starting to take effect. And then into September, in the animated thing at the beginning, you can see this happening, and it sort of happens before your eyes. September, then October. So it just starts getting worse. So, and then November. There we are, everything's gone through the floor in November. December. Now December. Just really looking, you know, everybody's kind of cottoned on by that stage. Hey, something's up. That's in December. Then January, let's just get January back on. January back on here. January over here, February over here. So, you know, to all intents and purposes, between January and February, there's not really much to be optimistic about. So if I just get this here. Right, now this is my master spreadsheet of the market going. Hold on, what's happening here? Okay, right, so don't know why that's headed with the left-hand column here is made up of data from HMRC, and then the mortgage data is from the Building Societies Association, and I was doing some analysis of the overall level of cash buyers in relation to mortgaged buyers. It's a relevant point to prices being stickier on the way down if cash buyers think there's value in the market, cash which is a point actually that's made by Lucian Cook in several of the Savills recent, but I think Lucian's analysis of the market is head and shoulders above just about everything else that gets quoted in the legacy press, in my own opinion. So this is the business end of it, which I put the copy in the blog. 2021 in England and Wales, the total number of transactions was 989,000. In 2022, the total had dropped to 726,000, according to my figures. That's with an estimate for December 2022, because that figure's still not firmed up at the Land Registry and HMRC. And then the provisional estimates for January 2023 and February 2023, which is from MPT tab March 2023, okay, is showing this is existing property sales in Wales, then in England, then new build in Wales, new build in England, and they're estimated, and these two figures are just way too high, and they're actually modelled, and the year-on-year figures, I don't know why the model hasn't sort of filtered this out and got it down. What I've actually done is I've looked at the figure here in February and said, right, in terms of sentiment, in terms of volumes, this is not very scientific, but where are we? And I think we're somewhere here. I don't think we've had the crash, but the level of activity is such that we're on a we're somewhere around here on the way down, but in terms of recovery and all the rest of it, I think the volumes that we're talking about are going to be you know, in this period here. I can't really justify that one way or the other at this point. I'm still in the middle of ploughing through the raw data, but the input from a gut feel, an educated guess, call it what you will, I think is better than an HMRC model, and I just don't think that the volumes in December, January and February or in March are going to be anything like the estimated January-February volume. I just can't see it, based on plot reservations, even with some reported slight recovery in new homes, plots reserved per outlet, etc. The market, in terms of sales volumes across the board, has been down between 30, 35, 40%, depending where you are, year on year, January to January, February to February. Those figures do come out, and when they're adjusted, I think they'll be adjusted downwards rather than upwards. And the final part of that is just how much mortgage activity has been going on. And so this is the bit at the bottom of the table there, and net lending. You see December 2022 net lending 2.9 billion, November 4.6, contrast that to in September 7.7. September 2021, a lot of damage done there. That was during the pandemic madness. January 2023, this shows 412 million. I mean, it's next to nothing. But it's early days yet, and all the data isn't to hand. So if I just get back to this here, I think this is the Bank of England figure here, beginning of March. That was other, yeah, millions, 56,897 million. So that's 1.4 billion, so it's down a hell of a lot. This figure here, net mortgage lending, I've still got more work to do on this, but the general feeling is that things have dropped off a cliff, and it's really hard to get your head round, because paring back, going back to something normal, but it's pointing to credit impaired banks not being able to make loans, and of course one's suspicions are aroused by what's been happening. Silicon Bank, these other the effect of the bond being held in reserves and losses, albeit notionally, on those, impairing the ability of mortgage making, which is mostly banks in the UK, their ability or wish to actually make loans. I think something cataclysmic almost has happened, and because the momentum in the market, which sort of has carried through from the first half, the increase in rates has perhaps arrested the decline. But because it's continuing, I think that eventually something has broken and it's just plummeted, and that's what these figures are suggesting to me, and what just the general feel of the market. Now, I cottoned onto this when I started digging into the figures in some detail between Christmas and New Year, and then through January I kind of watched them a bit further, but by halfway through February I just had to say to my fellow shareholders in my business, look guys, I'm not quite sure what's happening here, but it does seem to be pretty substantial, and I think we need to just not trim ourselves. I think what we've got to do is just put the ship in dry dock and wait and see what happens, and a month, 6 weeks later, I'm actually quite pleased that we did, and the quarter point hike, I think, is a huge mistake, and will it's more than the straw that killed that broke the camel's back. I think it's the coup de grace almost. I mean, I think it will do. If it was a boxing match, the ref should already have stepped in to stop further punishment, and it was just a free shot, bang on the chin of an already semi-conscious market. That's my take on what's been happening. I think it's very serious, and I don't think it's a policy mistake. I think it's a policy. I don't think it's an accident. I do think it's by design, and I do think that there are that small businesses, householders, the little people are considered expendable over and above keeping zombie global corporations alive. That's just my view. I hate coming to that conclusion. I don't even want it to be true, but I fear that it is. So back to the blog, and let's just go through, and I'll explain a little why I think that is. So that's the RICS survey from 2023. And so let's just go through this, and perhaps what I've just been saying then will make a little more sense. So, why the rate rises by the Fed on Wednesday and the Bank of England yesterday? They won't assist either new aspiring homeowners, both first-time buyers and families wishing to buy or rent secure homes. And the raising of the price of mortgages will also destroy or enable a continuing transfer of material wealth into the hands of those who own debt professionally over those who earn a living through working in the real Main Street economy. So where did all that wealth come from? Where is it headed? And what should we do about it? Now, that Ian Moraine on the Tony Blair Institute website published a paper on that basis, more or less around that title, and I put it in a blog here. There we are. Ian Moraine, where did all that wealth come from? And he said household wealth in the UK has increased by almost 10 trillion in the past 25 years, from 4.9 trillion in 1995 to 14.6 trillion in 2017. This is a staggering explosion in wealth. Well, actually, in pure bricks and mortars term, or physical numbers of homes, it's actually a value ascribed to a fairly slow growing stock. What's really been the staggering explosion is actually the quantity of money in the system. This is Robert John here, who was Paul Reitman's right-hand man at Canary Wharf back in the late 80s and the 1990s, and Robert here in the documentary The Fight for Docklands is talking about the 1987 crash in the housing market in the UK, which was a very big one, and it changed the affordability price profile of property quite considerably. He's talking in terms of the low billions, in terms of how much money is lent into property, and we're talking trillions now, not tens of billions. We've gone from tens of billions to hundreds of billions to trillions incredibly quickly, and the speed with which those quantities of money have appeared have seen a switch in balance between who has access to that purchasing power, and it's not regular people, regular business people, it's crony politicians, it's global corporations, and it is a new robber baron class. I mean, we are back in a new gilded age. So brush up your Veblen, really. I mean, and it's quite shocking how the institutions supposedly standing between citizens in a population and people with economic power, political power, forms of institutionalized power, how they've rolled over and failed to regulate, failed to contain this headlong plunge into utter elitist hubris is beyond me. I do find it staggering, and I've been paying attention to this sort of things since since 2010 for sure. So that's 13 years, and probably since the early 2000s as well. So over the noughties, I figured something was seriously up. Things were kind of changing, and then through the tens and teens, I became more and more concerned. And now, after the last 3 years, I'm more than concerned. I do think it's now it's time to take a stand and actually outright come and say, enough's enough. The RMT slogan, enough really is enough, and things are massively broken. The system can't be fixed, but there are options into what sorts of systems, what sort of things should be kept serviceable while we come up with a better idea. And so far the ideas coming forward from the central bankers and from the think tanks and foundations are not very good. The best people, the best minds are not employed in these organisations. This is where the yes men go, and it's painfully obvious that we are suffering at the hands of a kakistocracy, and we must just take the control levers away from them by putting our own people up for fair election, not through the party systems. I made a portal with John from the slog, called Wiki Ballot. Well, it wasn't really with John. He and I talked about it, but I did sort of make it, and it's, as with everything else, my blog, Wiki Ballot, actually talking sensibly about where these things are wrong. It gets shadow banned. People don't get to see it. There's way better stuff than mine that doesn't get seen, I have to say, but what I've put in this blog here with the links does connect up with some original thinking, some heterodox thinking, out of the box thinking, but nonetheless well researched, well sourced, well argued, falsifications of the nonsense which is peddled by by the current ruling class. So it's as simple as that, really. So anyway, that's so starting assumptions, and this is from a blog from someone called Blair Fix. I've read some of the Blair Fix work on the Real World Economics forum blog several times, and Blair Fix applies some of the Cree-order capital as power work, which says here of Jonathan Nitzan and Shimshon Bischler. This is a Nitzan talk on neoclassical political economy skating on thin ice, which I recommend anyone should watch. I'm not going to read what I've cut and pasted there, but it's talking about inflation, deflation, how inflation is basically not called what it is, i.e. people raising prices. Who are those people? Who's benefiting from those price increases? So inflation, the battle between creditors and workers. And then I refer to this paper by the late Dr. Adrian Wigley on understanding taxation and proposed taxation system to do with land value tax. This is from a document that we did at Homatics, which drew heavily on Adrian's work. And then there's some older discussions here. This is from 2017. As is this. There's a publication called Project Syndicate, which I occasionally will comment on. This is a Yanis Varoufakis article, which I commented on, with the promise of fiscal money. Now, I've got to go back, compare that article with Going Direct from BlackRock. Okay. So there is some sort of economic theory and some sort of fairly sort of dry academic stuff in all of that. But the long story short is where and what is the real reason for the current policy stance by central banks worldwide? Why would it seem that a destruction, or rather a transfer into the hands of the billionaire class of household wealth on a scale in excess of that in the global financial crisis one, that's the 2008 crash, 2007-2008, is a price which Bailey and Powell are lining us all up to pay? Is it that we should all be happy with owning nothing, as the now infamous World Economic Forum misquote would have it? The Uberization of everything following the peak everything bubble burst seems to be where we're in the midst of. So when I talk about Uberization, I'm talking about predatory pricing, forcing people out of business, create a monopoly, then putting your prices up and price gouging. That's the economic model, which in neoclassical political economy here they talk about monopoly, oligopoly, etc., and describe those processes in terms of sabotaging competitors. And you know, I think that's the right explanation of what's going on. So this is the own nothing misquote or whatever. I don't know if the video is actually yeah, it is. Let's just play it. Whatever you want, you'll rent and it will be delivered by drone. The US won't be the world's leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. You won't die waiting for an organ donor. We won't transplant organs, we'll print new ones instead. You'll eat much less meat. An occasional treat, not a staple, for the good of the environment and our health. 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. We'll have to do a better job at welcoming and integrating refugees. Polluters will have to pay to emit carbon dioxide. There will be a global price on carbon. This will help make fossil fuels history. You could be preparing to go to Mars. Scientists will have worked out how to keep you healthy in space, the start of a journey to find alien life. Western values will have been tested to the breaking point. Checks and balances that underpin our democracies must not be forgotten. And you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Right, so yeah, I am exasperated because no evidence required. It's just people standing up and spouting off. This idiot here, Trudeau, John Kerry, Al Gore, Bill Gates. Words can't describe the contempt, the utter contempt that I hold these people in. These people, they're not the brightest and the best. They're the most control-freaked, pathetic, paranoid, misanthropic, basket cases. I mean, we should all be striving to be sympathetic towards them, really, because they, you know, it is sympathy, that sympathy owed to the pathetic. And here's a blog about a quarter-point rise in interest rates, because make no mistake, it is all related to Aadhaar, which is the biometric identity system in India, which isn't working out terribly well, but that is the model which we're all headed for, and it's about rationing carbon, and it's about cornering the renewables carbon market to create a new type of deflationary gold standard that will institutionalise and bake into the cake austerity for the bulk of people, and as Calvin said, the poor will be kept poor so that they remain obedient, and that's what this is all about. As Gandhi said, there's more than enough for everybody's need, not enough. There's not enough just for the greed of Bill Gates, let alone for all of the other people of his ilk. So this is the best president the United States never had, Ross Perot. And if you watch that video, you'll see what he was saying about the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. It applies equally well to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, all of these trade deals which are now under the radar because they couldn't get them voted through. And the quarter-point rate just simply wasn't justified. I've kind of gone off point here now, but none of this is something that hasn't been warned about, that wasn't seen coming. I've been going on about this for the last 3 years. The massive inflation of bank balance sheets, why are they doing it, about digital currencies, about Aadhaar, about the seeming bankruptcy of planning policy, how the policy is to talk about things, to pay them lip service, but actually not to do anything. And if you are going to do something, make sure it makes things worse, not better. This is a quote from Ms. Shedlock: as long as the Fed sticks with a policy of higher for longer, housing will be very weak, and if housing is weak, GDP will be weak as well. Nonetheless, it's likely the Fed will stick with higher for longer out of fears of stirring up inflation. What is inflation? Let's just go back and just look at this linguistics of inflation point. To start our journey into income redistribution, let's talk about terminology. The word inflation, what does it describe? Too many people, inflation refers to a decrease in the value of money. While this thinking is not wrong per se, it is needlessly abstract. We cannot measure the value of money. Instead, we measure price increases. Speaking of the phrase price increases, this language is also indirect. After all, prices don't raise themselves. If prices go up, it's because someone raised them. To bolster my profit, I raise prices. My point here is that there are different ways to talk about the phenomenon of inflation, and paradoxically, the word inflation is itself quite opaque. When inflation rears its head, what's actually going on is that groups of people compete to raise prices. Now, if English writers cared about accuracy, you'd think that they would favour terms that are clear, and yet when it comes to price hikes, the opposite is true. So inflation is one of those words, and if you look at how money is made and understand the inner workings of the sausage, you won't like it very much, but you're less likely to be taken in by the cock and bull stories that ends up burning you, and instead of sausages, the fat cats end up eating all the pies. So I had a discussion with Ranjan on the 28th of February about the wheels coming off, which is linked to in that blog. This was a good blog on Bloomberg, actually describing how the UK housing market was likely to, was risking a deep freeze, and I think that's true. At the end of the blog here, this is the Hermatics mind map for understanding affordable housing and our company's approach to that problem, which isn't something we can solve at the moment. The economic climate is such that until these political problems are sorted out, and this hijack of power by central bankers, this massive centralisation of economic power by command and control, paranoid, schizophrenic people who really, no one's voted for them, no one would vote for them, and you know, they just must be resisted, and so in the sub-market, the market which I'm interested in, where I make my living, that's what that mind map looks at. It looks at a lot of the talking shop aspects of it, but the bigger picture into which that fits is this one here. If you click on Going Direct, you come to the Going Direct paradigm, which is named after BlackRock, and this is pretty much the full enchilada here. Just log into it here. So anyway, I started making this on the 10th of July 2022, 2022. And I started making the Hermatics mind map on the 10th of July 2022 as well. So the Hermatics mind maps had 1,000 views, and the Going Direct Paradigm mind maps had just under 9,000 views. Given that I think that the URL is massively shadow banned, that isn't bad. But if we just open the Going Direct Paradigm, from the blog it's opening on this page. Now this is the military industrial complex, oil, gas and mining, and finance, insurance and real estate. So these are the three core groups of the oligarchy, the ruling class. The part that I belong to is the real estate part of FIRE. I'm a property developer. I'm a chartered surveyor. I qualified back in the early 90s and was heavily involved in London Docklands. I referred to Robert John earlier. He's a friend of mine, used to be Paul Reitman's right-hand man. But what's currently playing out isn't any kind of capitalism that I wish to be associated with. I absolutely do not own any of the World Economic Forum or corporate nonsense or the fascist government nonsense that's being dished up by Rishi Sunak. It makes me angry, and I think that really needs to be said. I've spoken privately with quite a lot of people making these points, but I'm quite prepared now to make them publicly, because I think they need to be made publicly, because Rishi Sunak is incompetent. Rishi Sunak is not qualified to be a Prime Minister. He's a poacher turned gamekeeper, effectively, or a game. Yeah, that's right. Yet he's still poaching. He has a massive conflict of interest, and those sorts of revolving door conflicts of interest are utterly unacceptable. And there you have it. I really do think Liz Truss was a better Prime Minister than Rishi Sunak. I think the Tory party made the right choice the first time round. I think that Kwasi Kwarteng was a better Chancellor than Jeremy Hunt. So again, I think they had that the right way round, and I think that the September Kamikaze budget was the right thing to do, but the wrong thing in terms of the central bank policies and the austerity, which never works, but which is a prerequisite of the model which has been at work in our economies since 1914, when the Fed was established, 1913, and which was sidelined when the Bank of England was nationalised in the post-war by the post-war Labour government, and the golden period, although it was post-imperial for Britain, you know, through the 50s and 60s, after the unnecessary war of World War II. I call it unnecessary because it was unnecessary to fund Hitler into power, which was actually something that was carried out by East Coast US bankers and certain elements of the City of London sympathetic to Nazism, that particular pernicious form of fascism. And there you have it. The timeline is quite long, but I digress. Banking cartels. Okay, that links to this model here. If I click there now, look. and another one of these mind maps will appear, and this is the history blueprint model made by Richard Grove, and this was made in 2018, and Jekyll Island meeting, Colonel House, the Corsican math, credit swaps, Deutsche Bank, the Franklin cover-up, globalism, Warburg and Co, so on. Actually, I wonder if they've got, if he's got Major Douglas in here. Let's just have a look. No, right, okay. I'm gonna round up just with that, and what I'm gonna do, just go back here. Let's see if we've got. Okay, so right, we've got that mind map. So I've shown you the 3 mind maps, and I'm going to round up then here. Okay, so this is Douglas Social Credit, and let's have a look. What's the purpose of the economy? What is money and where does it come from? Money in the economy, the gap, causes of the gap, conventional methods of dealing with the gap, summary of Douglas Social Credit, Christianity, social environment, war, social credit and gold standard, social credit, government spending, and okay, what we're going to do is look at episode 6 and conventional methods of dealing with the gap. Which explains the reason that this 0.25% increase in interest rates being sabotaged, that kind of goes against intuition, but this explains why
Episode 6,
this sort of thing
conventional
happens.
methods of dealing with the gap. We are often told that economic growth is absolutely necessary for a healthy economy. But what if this isn't true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, constant economic growth is only necessary because it is one of the main ways of filling the price-income gap. You see, if the flow of consumer prices exceeds the flow of incomes distributed in the course of production, there are only 2 ways of achieving an equilibrium or balance. You can decrease prices, or you can increase consumer buying power. The existing system does both. But since decreasing prices under current financial rules means economic slowdown, with all of the hardship that implies, such as business bankruptcies and increasing unemployment, cutting prices below cost can only serve as a temporary expedient. The more favourable solution, which is a feature of periods of solid economic growth and also of feverish booms, is to increase the flow of consumer buying power. And the chief way to do that is by borrowing more and more debt money into existence from the banks. Governments at all levels, federal, state or provincial, and local or municipal, can borrow more money into existence from the banking system and spend it on public works such as roads, harbours, hospitals, airports or public services. Since the public do not pay for such production immediately, but only many years and even decades into the future via taxation, public production on borrowed money can increase the flow of incomes to consumers while keeping the flow of consumer prices constant. Similarly, the expansion of private production, especially capital production, which is production the consumer does not immediately pay for, can increase the flow of incomes to consumers. Filling the gap or achieving equilibrium via constantly increasing production, whether private or public, explains the emphasis that politicians put on the necessity for jobs and growth and for more jobs and more growth, like a never-ending mantra in the tradition of Chinese water torture. As an alternative to more and more production, the gap can also be filled by relying on the consumer to borrow more money into existence from the private banks. Hence the ubiquity of mortgages, lines of credit, credit cards, student loans, car loans, installment plans, etc. These consumer debts in both absolute terms and as a percentage of disposable incomes tend to go up and up until perhaps a financial crisis ensues and some of the debts are written off. Now, whether the extra debt money needed to fill the gap comes from increased production or an increase in consumer loans, the effects are largely the same. The gap which the financial system creates between prices and incomes puts the banking system in the driver's seat, as it possesses the only mechanism that can alleviate that deficiency: its monopoly on the creation of credit. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute.
So, I'm going to wrap up there. Monopoly on the creation of credit, and that's hugely centralised, becoming more so, and it's a monopoly on credit and controlling people through debt, through credit, through rationing carbon, through an Aadhaar-like system. So this is what the digital passports, all through the COVID side of things. So it's ID 2020, it's Star X, the 5G, surveillance capitalism. All of these things figure into what's going on. And the 0.25% interest rate hike, which is unnecessary, it is sabotage of that market to force more people into a position of weakness whereby they can then be dictated to. And that's the only explanation. It certainly wasn't necessary from a policy point of view, because the hikes already are going to cause prices to fall. The last push could well make them collapse, and coupled with the possibility of smaller banks going out of business, that could also contribute to further credit tightening, which again could lead to accelerating the downsides of these things. So there are several variables which are intimately connected, and they're connected through the central banking system, and the central banking system is pushing incredibly hard for a central bank digital currency, through which they plan to eat the lunch of a lot of smaller banks. And already through open banking, the face of high street banking has changed immeasurably in the last 3 years, certainly over the last 10 years or so, over my lifetime. I can remember when the first cash points started appearing. Yeah. Anyway, it's time to stand up and actually start expecting some ethical behaviour from the charlatans that are running the show. It really is that simple. And if you want to find out a bit more or read a bit more about Andrew Bailey when he was at the FSA, read the BuzzFeed article, The Dash for Cash. And baked into all of that, I mean, Bailey's only been head of the Bank of England since Mark Carney retired, and I think Mark Carney was probably a worse governor than Bailey is. A close run thing. But the lunatics have taken over the asylum. It's time to take back control, people. Anyway, signing out, and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks very much.